Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Culturally Responsive Built Environments. Today we are going to talk about social change in India, and especially in the first stage we are talking about the Sanskritisation part. So basically I am looking at the social change in India from the historic timeline, starting from Indus Valley civilization and today's globalization. So I am dividing that into phases, and today we are going to deal with the first phase, which actually talks from the Sanskritisation aspect. But when I am discussing about this Sanskritisation aspect, I am also relating with the kind of modern dimension of it. So it's not only what happened in that time of the time, but I am relating it with how different authors have talked about in this time of that Sanskritisation. So when we talk about history, and especially when we talk about Indian civilization, the very first thing which comes in our mind is one of the first river valley civilizations. We have 5 river valley civilizations very popularly known. One is the Indus Valley civilization, and you have in the African continent, you have the Nile Valley civilization, you have the Mesopotamian civilization, and you have the Yellow Valley civilization. So like that we have these river valley civilizations, and one of it is Indus Valley civilization. And you have got an abundance of literature on Indus Valley civilization, which of that time, which we are talking about nearly 2000 to 2500 BC. Today we are talking about nearly 4000 to 5000 years ago. So how the science and art of living, and especially how making the settlements, was even evidence in the case of Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. In fact, even in that time, we do have the evidences of some of these Indus Valley civilizations, which spreads on the northern west part of the Pakistan, the Pakistan component of it, and the northern west of India, parts of Gujarat, Dholavira, and the Jammu, Punjab, the western and eastern Punjab parts. So we have a very good evidences of ancient sites of that time, and very prominent sites in today's reference is also, which is evident, is Harappa, the Harappan civilization, and the Mohenjo-daro. So what you see here is a kind of settlement layouts where we have the whole settlement have a good planning system. That's where they talked about the street layouts, which was oriented towards the cardinal directions, and they also have an understanding of the basic principles of traffic with the rounded corners to allow the turning of carts, and these streets divided the city into 12 blocks. So basically the skeleton of the street network divided the whole settlement into 12 blocks, except for the west central block. The basic unit of city planning was an individual house. Here the individual house, the courtyard system planning has been done, and the drainage system has been evident in that particular planning process. Unlike many other river valley civilizations where we think about Mesopotamia, we talk about the monumental scale of ziggurats, where in Nile Valley we talk about pyramids. Here we may not find that kind of monumental scale, but they do have the functional scale of, like we have some of the important, the great bath and the granary to store the grains. So this kind of, because in the earlier slide which I was talking about, the central western blocks were reserved for public architecture. So that is where the great bath has been subject of much debate. And so it might have been various ritualistic bathing, various ceremonial issues, or so that is where the public ceremonies used to take. So before talking about the further civilizations, what happened in India, I would like to give you a brief understanding of a very vague timeline. I cannot say it's exact, but it's a very more or less of a similar times. So if we are talking about the Indus Valley civilizations, we have the Mohenjo-daro here, we have you have the Harappan civilization, you have the Dholavira in the Gujarat, you see. So this whole stretch, we have the evidences of Indus Valley, because here one of the Indus River, which branches into Jhelum, Zeneb, Ravi, Beas, Sutlej. So this is basically 5 rivers. So that is where today we call Punjab. Punjab is about 5 rivers. So in how the name India also comes from Sindhu River, and then it become a kind of Indus, and then Hindu, and then that's how the India name has derived from, because that is how various timelines and different political slangs came through, and that is how the transformation came. But if you look at the Indus Valley about 2000 to 2500 BC onwards, it was a very flourishing settlement, and throughout the world, that is where the Silk Route connecting to the China and the Mesopotamian civilization, and that is an exchange of trade and economy throughout the length and breadth of the world was happening through this civilization, this route. But very near to this, you can see that gradually there has been on and off degradation of these settlements. So what could be the reason for this? That was not very clear, but some of the assumptions from the scientific literature talks about, one assumption talks about a spread of various epidemic and endemic diseases, and some have talked about frequent wars, and some have talked about drought, famine, and which has actually devastated all these settlements. So, and even there were very recent studies which talks about there were some nuclear radiations which were found in the Harappan sites, where they talked that because of various invasions or the wars, without knowing this is a kind of nuclear weapons, in that time people might have used some of these kind of nuclear. So they are not sure what was the right cause, but still there was some kind of assumption this could be the reason why people started migrating. So we talk about the Aryan race, and of course there are various contradictions on McMuller's theory of Aryan invasion, and whether the Aryans came from here or Aryans do exist here. That is we are not debating at that point now. So when the things have become difficult at this part of time, and people started moving to other places, and the Indo-Aryans, they started migrating to different places, and that is how you can see a gap of about, let's say, about 400 years. You don't find much of literature what happened in that particular phase before the Vedic period have started, and now when the fusion of these people migrating and to the existing population, and that is where, because they have seen the worst part of the life where certain devastations happen for various reasons. Now this is where we talk about the starting of the Vedic period. And initially in this particular phase, this is the Vedic period where people have generated the rich scientific literature. I mean, they have developed the 4 Vedas. Vid means to know, and the Veda is knowledge. So this Rig Veda is the first part which they have developed, and after that they developed the Ajur Veda, Sama Veda, and all these aspects. So during this period, if you look at what were the settlements, because before the Vedic time, you have evidences of a good scientific planning approaches in the city, and you have a good organization of various public places to the private spaces, from the great granaries to the bath and to the individual dwellings of a courtyard houses, and a linear pattern of arrangements, and a block level dividing a block level. But in the Vedic time you may not find that kind of a very monumental scales, and but that also took some time to take over. And from here again, if you take, this is 1000 BC, this is where we talk about our Puranic events that might have took place about Mahabharata or Ramayana, and that is where we again further go down to the 500 BC about, that is where the Buddhist, before we are coming to this, and that is where the Buddhism and Jainism have been started, and that's the whole transformation. If you look at this particular, and how the settlements, especially in the Vedic civilization were, and that's, I'm just briefing it out, what is the Vedic. So as I said, here the Vid means to know, and Veda means, literally means knowledge. So here, and that is where, because the rich scientific which has a laid foundation for even today's modern Indian society, these Vedas are the first very basic foundation pillars, and that is how the whole society is based on. And today, even today, whatever various caste systems we are following, various social institutions we are following, various rituals we are following, so basically our way of life is defined with that particular principles. And there's a small video I've just show you to show how the patterns of living during the, it's a very educative video, it's very even the kids can look at it. So it's just to understand how their basic house types and how their way of living. Just a 2-minute video.
The Vedic Age. The Aryan invaders were primarily nomads. They were not accustomed to the urban way of life. They cleared forests near riverbanks and settled in small villages. The Aryan villages were simple structures which formed the basis for architecture in India. These huts were very basic, circular, and with thatched roofs over bamboo logs. Fences of wood and bamboo surrounded the settlement for protection against wild animals. Soon, the demand for fertile land grew and rivalry spread. Groups of villages joined forces, and thus small cities or clans called Vees were born. A group or clan formed a Jana, and their leader was the Rajan or king. The city buildings were made almost entirely from wood, and walls protected each city. The Vedic carpenters became skilled at constructing timber structures, and their techniques were used in stone constructions of the future. During this period, the barter system flourished. Coins were introduced for trade and were called the Nishka. It was during the Vedic age that the caste system was born. Due to work specialization, different classes of society developed. The Aryans made the single largest contribution to the Indian religion through Sanskrit. It was during this age that the Vedas were most composed. These sacred scriptures included Atharva Veda, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda. Two of the greatest epics were also composed during this period, the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. These tell us a great deal about the culture, society, and religion of the people of that era.
And when it comes to the Vedic literature, we have two types of literature. One is the Shruti literature, and the Smriti literature. And whereas Shruti, it is basically the knowledge attained by all the saints or the rishis with the kind of meditative and the tapasya or sadhana, which is kind of supranormal consciousness. So, whereas Smriti, it talks about what is remembered and knowledge acquired through the experience or the tradition. So, because how we act, this Puranic elements also come in this phase where we talk about what has happened, what is remembered, and how this is passed on as a tradition to the further generations. Now, and this is the time we were talking, because see, if we talk from the Greek civilization, that is where the democracy was first thought about it. And when we are talking here the Indian society, how the stratification of the society have started. And initially, if we look at this is all based on the followed on Chaturvarna classification, and what it does is, so it has divided the society into different segments. In fact, there are different versions of it. One is, in fact, one of the main Hare Rama Hare Krishna Prabhupada, Sri Prabhupada, what he says is, it's a management principle, how a strategy, how it's a kind of strategic management principle, how a society could operate and sustain. So what he says is, and they relate to the place. So a Brahman who was normally referred in the kind of highest order of the society, so it's basically in the mouth, it is referred to the top pinnacle of it, Brahman, who manages the spirituality of the place. And you have the arms, who manages the defense of the place, that is where the Kshatriya comes in. And then you have the legs, who operates with the trade and the economy of the place, who roam around and who manages the trade and economy of the place. And then we have, that is where the legs, and then we have the feet, which is the Sudra and further the untouchables, who supports all these categories. So without them, you can't imagine that these people can operate, because everything is mutually supportive in nature. So initially the Varna and the first top three, they were in some of the literature which is still not completely proven, but they say Dvija, which is also twice born groups. So some actually contradict on this. There's nowhere it was mentioned in the Vedas or anywhere like that. But I'm ignorant of this particular. But what they say is twice born groups, which are referred to kind of. So first you are born as a physical being with your parents, and then once you are reborn, to actually be part of the society, and that is where this talk about the kind of twice born groups. So you are in the higher order of it. So, but the difference between Varna is basically each color is denoted with different occupations. Here you can interchange occupations through, like, let's say a potter can become a warrior after a generation or two generations. So here the interchange of this social mobility is always possible. But how does this caste system, and especially this Varna system, is gradually led to the Jati system? So if you, this is what I understood from studying various parts of literature, and I am just telling my understanding. And what I felt was, when initially it was stratified based on the occupation systems, and one can interchange, like if you look at the Kshatriyas type, even Mahapadamanand, who was also a kind of referred as a kind of Shudra king. So basically there was, Shudras were also kings in the historical events, and so they can easily interchange the occupations. But it might have happened in such a way that maybe a potter, or example any other, and a Brahman was practicing his spiritual in the temples in the hardcore of the city, and whereas the Sudras and untouchables living outside the bank of the river and working on pots, working in a hot sun. So obviously there are some genetical transformations through generations. Let's say 4, 5, 7 generations. There are definitely because of heat, because of their exposure to the climate. So how definitely the genetical transformations have occurred. And obviously the pollution aspect also is an important, because the person working in a pottery is more exposed to the kind of pollutants, and that is how, you know, the person who is more in a spiritual aspect of the place, so how he tried to demarcate himself in a more of polluted and non-polluted and more spiritual, you know, this kind of category might have developed. That is what my understanding about. So this might have taken a long time, but gradually this has evolved as kind of varna to the jati system. That is where a Brahman has to be born in the Brahmin, and a potter has to be born. So your birth is the signifying factor of your jati, and it is there for your lifetime token. So I want to bring an important author's work, especially on this caste issues, where he talks about on the same topic. Mysore Narasimhacharya Srinivas works, which is a great sociologist work, and he worked on social change in modern India. In fact, he talked about Sanskritisation, Westernization. He also talked about the modernization aspects of it. But in this lecture, we'll be talking about what he talks about the Sanskritization of it. When this caste system, and especially in his work in the Coorg community in Karnataka, where he have greatly observed how the transformation, how the imitation of these caste groups or the tribal groups, how they're imitating the upper class and the lower, to attain the status of it. So he observed very carefully, and that is how he initially coined a term of Brahmanization, because at that point of time Brahman is one of the kind of higher order, because he is more valued because of his spiritual nature and because of its than Kshatriyas or Vaishyas. So he is on the higher order. So that is where the imitation has been taken with the Brahmanization. But then he replaced this by the Sanskritization. It may not be refer only to the Brahmins, it might also refer to the higher, or like the twice born groups, like some might have imitated with the Kshatriyas, like even within the Coorg community there are also some kind of Amman crew Coorgs who might have followed the kind of Brahman community, and there are other group community which might have followed the Kshatriyas communities. So there are obviously, it's not only the Brahmins. So then that way he framed the concept of Sanskritization. So there are various, this is a very important work, and various reviews have been done on M.N. Srinivas' work, and some of the criticisms also have been made. So one of the important work, at least I felt, is the re-examining the Sanskritization toward an alternative interpretation. So that is where Oinam Vani Chanum is his work, and this is a reference of this. So what M.N. Srinivas, what he talks about, Chanu understands the Srinivas work is basically this caste-based five-fold hierarchy is a theoretical framework, and that's how the whole India is practicing, and is referred to as Varna, which is different from the real unit of caste system, the Jatis. So as I said, the Varna was initially thought about the management philosophy of it, and here the Jati, it is looking at the kind of ethnicity of it. So one has to be born in this. So the reality, the theoretical aspect and the reality is two different. So when he talks about the Jati, it is a small, very small local endogamous group that practices a traditional occupation and also enjoys certain amount of cultural, ritual and juridical autonomy. And what this Varna gives is, it gives an overall framework where various Jatis can be fitted. So for example, let's say if you are talking about a family, a particular group of a society which are the cider makers, So who takes the ciders, the palm ciders. So if imagine if they are belonging to a particular clan or a group. So when we talk about endogamy, obviously it talks about within that they might have smaller groups, but then even their marriage, everything happens within that group. So they don't want to go out of that. So because they share a similar cultural values, they have similar food habits, dress, and their diet. So it is very important that they maintain within that endogamous group. So Whereas the Varna system, as we talked about, as it talks about the occupation based, so these kind of occupations can be, the jatis could be fitted within that larger framework. That is where Srinivas also have find difficulties in arranging these jatis within the framework because of the confusion in the middle regions of the Varnas. So, where you are talking about the Sudras, the Vaishyas, and the Kshatriyas and the Brahmins, where you are talking about these the middle aspects of it, how because it is not a very static thing, things are changing in time, and except the Brahmins, you can say, who are at the top, and the untouchables who are always in between, it's always difficult to fit where we can fit them. And that is where the movement of various castes in the middle regions, he talks about, does not impact on the structure of the system. See, one is trying to imitate the upper caste, but he might follow his diet, he might follow his dress, he might follow his rituals, he might follow the way he lives, but what it is not creating an impact on the structure of the system. It is only giving a positional change. It is only giving a positional change of the concerned caste. So he might become rich or he might become equivalent to it, but the thing is, it is not changing the structure of the society. That is where, while individual caste moved up or down, the structure remained the same. So that is one of the important understanding. Then again, here we talk about, there are 2-3 models of Sanskritization, but I am basically emphasizing on 2 models of the Brahmanical model and the Kshatriya model, which is the most valued model. So here, when we talk about the most valued model and the most popular model, so why the Brahmanical model is most valued? Because of it's the dominant caste, and it's also because certain practices of the rituals they do, and certain tedious practices, which in terms of their diet, in terms of the Vedas, in terms of the scientific literature they pronounce. So they all, that particular thing actually segregates the rest of the people from very differently, because the whole occupation is more of a spiritual orientation, a ritual orientation, but here it is a different orientation, like Kshatriya, and that is where it becomes a kind of more valued model, and this is more of a popular model, because this could be easily attained, but to attain this, you need to do a lot of effort, and the integration also is a very difficult process. And on the other hand, we talk about the M.N. Srinivas' work on the understanding of the Sanskritization. Why he referred this word of Sanskritization from Brahmanization is because if we actually talk about, it is not only people tending to change towards, imitate or the Brahmins, but there are also other groups which they are the higher caste groups. So, but if you, it is also talking about a society, and how he talks about the Sanskritic Hinduism, because much of the literature is literate in the Sanskrit, and it is very much well practiced, and that is where he talks about how these associated with the place. Of course, they are all mentioned in the sociological terms. In fact, I try to bring with the kind of how it is associated with the places. On one, we talk about the river worship. So let's say in a context of Cougs, he talks about the Kaveri river, which is regarded as a sacred river by all Hindus. So that is actually, this whole theory is uniting all the communities, different castes, and how a place is actually a kind of unifying factor. So the river worship, like an example, there are many tribes in Chhattisgarh area, in Amarkantak and Madhya Pradesh area, but you see everyone, there are different tribes, their own gods, but then they still all pray for the river Narmada. They call it Narmada Maya. Similarly, in the Kur community of various tribes as well. So you have the Kaveri Ma, and the second thing which they share about is the kind of Hindu mythology. So in fact, as I discussed before, the Hindu Puranas about the Ramayana or Mahabharata, which acts actually as a medium to locate various local communities within the vast landscape. When we talk about these stories, these are narrated through places, through people, their activities, and that is how people associated their belonging. And that gives a very vast landscape. When the moment you are talking about Ramayana, it starts from Ayodhya to Sri Lanka. The whole landscape is visualized, is imagined. And they also have the Kaveri Purana. In the Cook community, they have also Kaveri Purana. And the great epics of Ramayana and Mahabharata, as well as, they have the myth of Bhima's pebble and Rama's dilemma. All these things is connecting the communities. And then the Sanskritic theological ideas. So they also talk about, because in the Hindu philosophy, we talk about the karma and dharma, and we talk about the good and bad and the heaven and hell, so the moksha. So because these are some of the aspects which actually connects with these common theological ideas. And the sacred direction, the Cooks also believed that eastern direction with the sun god as a good sacred direction, and the southern direction associated with Emma as a bad sacred direction. So even the direction also talks about, and the way the mourning, when some death happens, obviously in many Hindu cultures, even today we see they shave off their head, and especially for the chief male members, and the dietary habits which do not include meat or alcohol. And especially in the Gur community, they do have this kind of pork meat, and whereas in the auspicious conditions they cook vegetarian. In some of the communities they do only vegetarian. So especially even in the mourning period, so each of these customs are very much related. Birth related, pollution, purity. Again, when a child is born, and the whole entire Kur family, they call, at least in Andhra we call it as Antu, and we'll call for a specific period of time, let's say 12 days after the birth, and then they take a bath, so that the whole impurities go out, and they again clean all the whole house. So they did conduct a ceremony. So these are kind of rituals which also, again the holy bath. So it's also the belief of how the bathing ceremonies, not only in the Tala Kaveri, which is the starting point of the Kaveri, and as well as the Dakshina Ganga. So, and in the marriages, so here again they perform various rituals in the marriages, how the bride and the bridegroom perform, especially. And there is one significant thing which you can look at it is a kind of here they have to actually one of the member of the groom's party, he has to chop down the mock banana trunk soldiers. So basically a kind of a warrior way of imitating of the Kshatriyas. So they need to, this is one of the ritual which so he need to chop down all these warriors, the mock warriors, and again practicing the vegetarianism during festivals. So again it offers non-vegetarian dishes, but during the ceremonies they are obviously purely vegetarian, and this is very common in the whole South India. And the idea of this whole process is, it is basically knitting the Hindus together into a community. This is where we are talking about tribal groups, but these kind of landscape of a river, landscape of a places, landscape of a rituals, this kind of rituals, what they practice, the dietary processes, the way they live. So all this connects a kind of community. It gives a shape for a community. And whereas the reformist sects like the Jains and Lingayas ended up become caste, which resulted in wars around them, while at the same time they remained within the fold of Hinduism. So in that way, there's so this is just an introduction, how Sanskritisation has been taught, and how it has been both as a segregation aspect and as well as an integration aspect. So coming from our discussion from the Vedic civilization, we move now on to the kind of Mahajanpadas, because after the Indus Valley you don't find much bigger cities. In the Vedic you find only a smaller settlements, but gradually as time has moved on, we come to a stage of the 16 mega kind of urban centers. Like you can see here the kind of Taxila, Gandhara. Gandhara, I think you might have heard about Mahabharata, where the Queen Gandhara comes from, and the Kasi. So there are 16 centers. So this is one of the 250 BC's Taxila layout, so which is in a kind of axial pattern, so which is now in the Pakistan. So if you look at it, it has contained many shrines and temples, and again the axial roads are divided by streets and regular blocks of buildings. And so this is how the urban centers started, rising on. And I think the bottom one which you can see is a kind of Avanti here somewhere, near Ujjain. That is the recent excavation you can find. But in south we may not. I mean, till now at least I couldn't get an idea of one of these Mahajanpadas. But till this point, after let's say from 5th till 6th to 5th to 6th centuries, our society is framing up, it is molding up, it is transforming, Varna, from Varna system to the Jati system, and till now our society, it is theoretically it is framing up, as well as in realistically also it is shaping out. But what is the form of the society and how the society is giving a form? And that is where the Gupta period we should talk about is roughly, we talk about 3rd through 6th century, which is referred also as a golden age. And that is where it is a prominent time where we got a form, and architecturally a temple architecture, where the shape here, if in Indonesia we can see the Buddhist Borobudur temple, and we're in the Shavata temple at Diogad. And so this is where the form has given to the society. The meanings have developed, associated. Till now the society was framing, even within the process, the social institutions like marriage has established. This was a very recent institution, because in order to have a control of the reproduction patterns and how to have a control of these gotras, everything. So marriage is an institution, and it is also related with the kind of how a property is transferred, both of a patrilineal systems, matrilineal systems. So they are all a very indigenous thinking, and it has a very much scientific relevance how in the continuity of the society. And in that process, that is the point where we reach about Gupta time, where a society has a visible forms in form of temples. So this is what we talk till Gupta period, and in the next lecture we talk from Gupta period onwards, how the colonization, the westernization, and more to the industrialization we'll talk about. Thank you.